The busy streets of New York City never sleep. The skyscrapers rise into the sky, gleaming in the evening light, reflecting the hustle and bustle of millions of people. Here, where the sea of people is constantly moving, no one really pays attention to anyone, unless something forces them to stop. Amelia Johnson walks confidently, her high heels clicking softly but authoritatively on the pavement. In her early 40s, she is a successful woman, a lawyer who is well known in the city, not only for her legal skills but also for her strong voice in the fight for equality. Today, Amelia has a special plan. She wants to find the perfect gift for her beloved husband Derek to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. The jewelry gallery on Madison Avenue is known for its luxury and class. Outside, the polished glass windows reflected the sparkling diamonds inside, luxury items that promised wealth and status. As Amelia stepped through the door, the atmosphere inside immediately enveloped her, cool, quiet, and refined. She slowly walked over to one of the glass cases and scanned the elaborate displays of jewelry. A beautiful diamond pendant caught her eye. Amelia smiled, imagining Derek's radiant face when he received the gift. But just as she was about to point to it, a voice rang out, pulling her out of her thoughts. "Can I help you?" Amelia looked up. In front of her was a sales clerk, a tall, elegant blonde woman. But her eyes weren't entirely friendly. Her expression was reserved, and her voice, though professional, carried a hint of coldness. "Yes, I'd like to see this necklace, please," Amelia said, pointing at the sparkling pendant. The woman paused for a second. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, just a moment, but Amelia recognized it. It was an appraising look, a flicker of doubt, as if she didn't belong here. Still, the clerk unlocked the glass case and handed the necklace to Amelia, her smile forced and stiff. As Amelia cradled the diamond in her hand, admiring its beauty under the crystal lights, a shout rang out. "Stop it! Put it down!" Before Amelia could react, a large security guard rushed over. Another woman, presumably the store manager, also advanced on her with an angry look. The entire store fell silent, all eyes on Amelia. "What are you doing?" the manager shouted. "We saw you take the item without asking the price. We have a strict policy against these kinds of things." "These kinds of things?" Amelia's heart sank. She looked around, noticing the looks of concern and curiosity from the other customers, mostly white, well-dressed men. No one came to her defense, no one said a word. "Are you accusing me?" Her voice was firm but calm. "I never intended to leave without paying. This is a misunderstanding." "We have procedures, ma'am," the manager growled. "We'll have to call the police." "The police?" Anger welled up in Amelia, but she remained calm. She placed the necklace back on the glass counter, straightened her jacket, and looked straight at the manager. "Call. And while you're at it, you might want to double-check your customer records." She took out her phone and dialed. A few seconds later, a deep voice answered the phone. "What's up, honey? Interesting situation on Madison Avenue, can I stop by?" Amelia said, her voice soft but slightly sarcastic. A soft laugh came from the other end of the line. "I'm on my way." As Amelia put her phone back in her pocket, she turned to look at the people in the store, seeing the confusion in their eyes. Little did they know that her husband, Derek Johnson, was not only a successful businessman, but also one of the most powerful judges in New York City. And when he walked in, the game would change. The shimmering light from the diamonds reflected through the glass display, drawing a brilliant light in Amelia's eyes. She reached out to lightly touch the elegant necklace, feeling the sophistication of each gemstone. But at that moment, she realized she was being observed. A sharp gaze swept over her, not just curiosity but something colder, suspicion. Amelia had experienced this feeling before. Subtle scrutiny, silent judgment simply because of her difference. Even though she had told herself many times that she had the right to stand here, to admire and possess the things she wanted, the feeling of being excluded still crept into every crevice of her mind. She kept a polite smile and asked in a calm voice, "How much is this necklace?" The woman behind the glass pursed her lips before answering. Her voice rang out, not hiding any trace of doubt. "Are you sure you can afford it?" Amelia's heart skipped a beat. The statement was more than just a question, it was a sharp stab at her pride. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because the implication was so clear. Keeping her voice calm, she replied, "I'm sure." The clerk flashed a look of displeasure before reaching for the necklace. But then she stopped, pulling her hand back, her eyes full of judgment. "I think it's best if you leave it in the glass case." Her voice was louder this time, drawing the attention of those around her. A wave of silence spread throughout the store. Amelia felt every gaze on her, the unspoken whispers enough to stifle her breath. Her face was red, not just from anger but also from the rising humiliation. But she held her ground, carefully placing the necklace back on the soft velvet cushion. "There's no need to do that." Her voice was firm, but she couldn't hide the anger that was swirling beneath her calm exterior. But it was too late. The clerk glanced at the security guard. A tall, stern-looking man quickly approached. "What's going on here?" he asked, his eyes sweeping over the clerk and stopping on Amelia's face. "She's trying to steal the necklace," the clerk announced, his voice sharp and certain. Without a moment's hesitation. The accusation was too sudden. Too absurd. For a moment, Amelia was speechless. She hadn't done anything wrong. She just stood there, wanting to buy something like anyone else. And yet, in an instant, she'd been made into a thief. "I didn't," Amelia began, but her voice was swallowed by anger, by shock, by the looks around her, the looks of those who had quickly believed the accusation. The guard raised his hand, stopping her. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." His tone wasn't harsh, but firm. An informal arrest, a public humiliation. Amelia could feel her heart tightening, her breathing becoming labored. Once again, she was being forced into a situation she didn't want. Once again, she was fighting to protect herself when she shouldn't have to. The store fell eerily silent. All eyes were on her. The weight of judgment was like an invisible net wrapped around her body, forcing her to brace herself. She swallowed the bitterness in her throat, eyeing the guard. "I did nothing wrong. But who will listen?" Amelia wanted to scream right there, to demand the justice she deserved. Anger boiled in her chest, her heart pounding faster, her hands clenching into fists. But she knew screaming wouldn't change anything. Fighting back would only make things worse. She took a deep breath, trying to contain the rage that was screaming in her mind, and nodded, as if accepting the unacceptable. "Let's go." Her voice shook, not from fear, but from anger being strangled by reason. As she walked out of the store, eyes were on her. Some were whispering, others were silently taking out their phones to record. Part of her wanted to turn and face them, to ask them why she deserved to be stared at. But she didn't. She just held her head high, walking as if what had just happened didn't touch her. But it did, deeper than anyone could imagine. In the security office, the guard asked her to sit down while they reviewed the footage. Amelia sat there, her body stiff, her mind racing. Why had a simple shopping trip turned into a nightmare? Why had she been treated like this? But she knew the answer. And knowing it didn't make it any easier. The moment seemed to stretch on forever before the guard turned back. His gaze softened, almost apologetic. "We've reviewed the footage," he said. "You did nothing wrong. You can go." Amelia nodded, but she didn't feel relieved. The anger didn't go away, the hurt couldn't be erased by a simple sentence. She silently thanked him and left, each step heavy with what had just happened. The mall was still noisy and bustling, but to her, it was like a stage, where every gaze was a sharp knife stabbing at her self-esteem. This wasn't just about her. This was about something much bigger. A bitter truth that people like her faced every day. The prejudices imposed on them just because of the color of their skin. When Amelia got home, Derek was waiting. The moment he saw her, he knew something was wrong. She tried to keep calm, but when she began to tell the story, all the anger, pain, and humiliation exploded. Derek listened silently. His face gradually darkened, his hands clenched into fists. They treated me like a criminal. His voice was tense, filled with burning anger. Amelia nodded, the bitter feeling still lingering in her throat. It was worse than that. They didn't give me a chance to explain. They just looked at me and decided that I was guilty. Derek stood up abruptly, his eyes sharp. This isn't over. We're going to do something about this. They can't just get away with it. Amelia looked at her husband, grateful. She knew Derek would always be there for her. But more than that, she knew he could make things change. Because Derek wasn't just her husband. He was a warrior, and this was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. Amelia walked into the cafe the next morning with a new determination. She sat down across from Marcus, the guard who had cleared her name the day before. He looked guilty, his eyes filled with regret as he looked at Amelia. I'm truly sorry you had to go through that. Marcus shook his head, his voice low. I could tell something was wrong from the start, but I had to follow procedure. Amelia took a deep breath, keeping her voice calm but firm. I understand, but an apology isn't enough. This isn't just about me. This is about how people like me are treated every day. We need to expose what's going on. Marcus stared at her for a moment, then nodded. I agree. I've seen this happen to other customers before, and it's not right. A simmering anger flared inside Amelia, but she knew she needed to control it. Then we need to gather evidence. I want that store held accountable. And I need your help. Over the next few weeks, Amelia and Marcus worked together to uncover the truth. They interviewed employees, reviewed security footage, and gathered testimony from other customers, people who had experienced similar discrimination. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of injustice that had plagued the jewelry store. There was no doubt that this was not an isolated incident. Late one evening, as Marcus was reviewing financial records and employee lists, he suddenly stopped, his eyes darkening. Amelia, you need to see this. She moved closer, peering at the computer screen. The name Claire Benson, the store manager, kept popping up in email exchanges under another name, Richard Evans. Richard Evans? Amelia frowned. Who is he? Marcus clenched his fists. A businessman. He's been trying to buy this mall for years. And from what I've seen here, it looks like he's using the store's discriminatory practices as a way to tarnish Derek Mall's reputation. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying that all of this isn't just some random act of racism, but part of a larger conspiracy? Marcus nodded. You and Derek aren't just being targeted because of who you are. It's because of the power you wield. If Derek is pressured into selling this mall, Evans will be able to take control. Amelia clenched her fists. Anger flared inside her, but this time, it wasn't just hopeless anger. It was a fire that spurred action. Then we have to stop him. They gathered all the evidence they could find, security footage, witness statements, financial records, and prepared for confrontation. That day, Amelia walked into the mall management office no longer just a woman fighting for personal justice. She had become an unstoppable force, ready to expose the machinations of the manipulators in the shadows. The door closed behind her. Now it was time to confront. Derek, Marcus and a few trusted employees entered the store, heavy bundles of evidence in their hands. The atmosphere in the room was as tense as a string that could snap at any moment. All eyes turned to the manager, Claire Benson, who stood waiting for them with a cold expression, her hands clenched into fists under her desk. We know what you did. Amelia spoke, her voice even but carrying a terrifying weight. Her eyes were cold, not a trace of wavering. Claire narrowed her eyes slightly, but her expression remained calm as if nothing had ever shaken her. "We have evidence of your discriminatory behavior," Derek continued, his voice calm but authoritative. "And we know about your connection to Richard Evans." There was a pause. Claire blinked, and for a brief moment, her expression showed confusion. But then, almost immediately, she regained her composure, her face hardening into a steel mask. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold, her arms crossed defensively. Derek took a step forward, his presence an impenetrable wall. He placed the file on the table, his fingers tapping lightly on the wood. "You're under arrest." His voice was low but firm, each word heavy as stone. "We have enough evidence to take this to court. And believe me, we will. Unless, you want to lose everything. I suggest you cooperate." Claire took a deep breath. For the first time, panic flashed in her eyes. She realized she had nowhere to go. After a few seconds of silence that seemed like a century, her shoulders slumped. "Okay." Her voice trailed off, as if her entire body was collapsing with each word. "What do you want?" Amelia stepped forward, looking Claire straight in the eye. "We want you to take responsibility." Her voice was unwavering. "You will publicly admit what you did and resign. Additionally, you will ensure your staff are trained to prevent this from happening again." Claire pursed her lips, struggling for a moment. But then, she nodded. "I will do it." The confrontation was over, but for Amelia and Derek, it was only the beginning. They knew this was about more than just one store. This was about change, about equity in spaces where power and privilege reigned. A few days later, Amelia and Derek held a press conference. The media crowded the hall, eagerly waiting for every word. As Amelia stood before the cameras, she felt her heart pounding, but not with fear, but with determination. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "No, this is not just about me." She took a deep breath, looking straight into the camera. "This is about the countless people out there who face discrimination every day just because of the color of their skin. This is about justice. And this is about making sure that no one else has to go through what I went through." Derek stepped up beside her, holding up the folder containing the irrefutable evidence. "We will not stop. Justice is not a privilege. Justice is a right for everyone." Security footage, fragmented testimony, thick financial records, all were meticulously documented and analyzed. This was more than a scandal, it was a wake-up call. The whispers, the suspicious looks, the resentment that ran through the crowd like an undercurrent waiting to explode. Reporters seized the moment, cameras panning to capture every expression, every tense moment. This was more than an event, it was a call to action. Derek stepped to the podium, his deep, steady voice booming through the microphone. "This is not just a personal matter," he declared, each word emphatic with determination. "This is public accountability. And we will not stop until justice is served." His words set off a storm of public opinion. Social media exploded with thousands of shares, and support for Amelia and Derek was everywhere. Across the country, people were calling for change. The store's management had no choice but to give in. And within days, Claire Benson had resigned. New policies were put in place, promising a complete end to discrimination. Amelia and Derek had won. But the victory was not a happy ending. It left scars that never healed, painful memories that could not be erased. The jewelry store, once a symbol of luxury, now meant something else, a mark of struggle. But Amelia and Derek did not let their pain overwhelm them. They turned it into strength, using their voices to push for real change. For days, Amelia's phone continued to ring. Texts and calls from strangers, from people who had gone through similar pain. They thanked her for speaking up, for standing up for those who had been silenced, treated unfairly, simply because of the color of their skin. Amelia's story was no longer her own. It had become the story of thousands. But with this power came growing pressure. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the window, Amelia sat quietly at the kitchen table. Her phone rang again, but she didn't reach for it. Derek looked at her, put down his coffee cup, and gently took her hand. "You're so quiet," he said, his eyes filled with concern. "What are you thinking?" Amelia sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's just, all of this. It's so much bigger now." Derek squeezed her hand, a wordless gesture of reassurance. Because they both knew, this fight wasn't over. But they also knew that they had made a difference. They had proven that even the most deeply ingrained prejudices could be challenged. And in the end, justice always prevailed. "I'm glad we spoke up, but there's still so much more to do. Thinking about it, I realize that the changes required are not small, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to face them all." Derek squeezed her hand gently, his eyes firm but also filled with a rare tenderness. "You don't have to do it all at once. What you've done so far has made a huge impact. You're opening the door for others to step into the light, but don't forget that you need to take care of yourself, too." Amelia took a deep breath, trying to absorb the warmth of his words. She smiled, small but sincere. "Thank you, Derek. You always know how to calm me down when things get too much." But deep down, Amelia knew, this was just the beginning. She had spoken up, and now, people were looking to her to continue pushing for change. The pressure was heavy on her shoulders, but she knew she couldn't stop. That weekend, Amelia got a call from Marcus. "Hey, I did some digging." His tone was serious, without a trace of his usual lightness. "I thought you should know." Amelia's heart sank, a bad feeling coming over her. "What happened?" "I was looking through some old reports and found out that jewelry store incident wasn't an isolated incident. There were other complaints, racism, unfair treatment, and a lot worse. But they were all buried." Amelia frowned, a sense of dread rising in her chest. How is this possible? If there were complaints, why didn't anyone do anything about it? Marcus sighed, his voice weary. "They tried. But the administration shut it all down. They paid hush money to some, threatened others with legal action if they spoke out. This has been going on for years." Amelia's stomach clenched. This wasn't just one unfortunate incident, it was a broken system that had been in place for far too long. What had happened to her wasn't unique, it was part of a pattern of injustice that had been tolerated for far too long. She knew she couldn't let this go unnoticed. "We need to get this out in the open." Her voice was firm, her eyes shining with determination. "Those who have been silenced deserve justice." Marcus nodded over the phone. "I agree. But we're going to need more than we have now. We need people to come forward and share their stories." Amelia thought for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I'll take care of it. I'll contact the media, find a way to get people to speak out in the next few days." There was no time to hesitate. Amelia knew that once she had entered this fight, there was no turning back. And she didn't want to. She had come too far to stop now. She would fight, not just for herself, but for all those whose voices had been silenced. Because the truth deserved to be told. And justice had to be served. Amelia didn't stop at seeking justice for herself. She contacted reporters, lawyers, and civil rights organizations, determined to build a case that would not only seek justice, but also expose the jewelry store's history of systemic discrimination. What had happened to her was not an isolated incident, it was part of a pattern of injustice that had gone on for far too long. Slowly but surely, former customers who had been treated unfairly began to speak out. They recounted their harrowing experiences, the pain they had endured in silence. One of the first to come forward was Linda, a single mother. Her voice trembles as she recalls the days she was unjustly accused. "I was just trying to return a piece of jewelry I bought, but they couldn't find my name in the system. They looked at me like I was a thief. They humiliated me in front of my daughter. At that time, I just kept quiet and endured. I was scared, I didn't dare to fight back. But today, I'm not scared anymore. Carlos, a man who was humiliated in the middle of a store while shopping for a wedding ring with his fiancée, also spoke up. The memory of the humiliation is still fresh in his heart. I just wanted to buy a ring to propose to the woman I love. But the security guard stopped me, immediately suspicious of me. They didn't think I could afford it, just because I didn't look like the type of customer they wanted. I kept quiet that day. But now, I can't keep quiet anymore. Each story is a heartbreaking testament to the injustice that permeates the system. This wasn't just one employee's problem, or one store's. It was part of a larger problem, one that had affected too many people. When Amelia held her second press conference, she wasn't standing alone this time. Linda, Carlos, and many other victims stood by her side. The room was packed with reporters, flashbulbs flashing as Amelia took the podium. She took a deep breath, her voice calm but filled with emotion. I stand here today not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been treated as if they were less than because of who they are. What happened to me in this jewelry store was not an accident, it was part of a pattern of injustice that has been going on for years. And today, we're here to expose it. She gestured for Linda to come forward. The woman gripped the microphone, her hands shaking slightly but her voice stronger than ever. I was accused of stealing, humiliated in front of my daughter. I was scared. But now, I will not be silent. Carlos stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. I was treated like a second-class citizen because of the color of my skin. I was patient. But now, it has to stop. Amelia looked around the room, her eyes determined. She knew that they were not just the ones speaking out, they were the ones initiating change. We don't ask for much. We just want to be treated with respect. And we won't stop until we get it. Amelia stood before the crowd at the press conference, her voice filled with determination and emotion. We are demanding what should have been given to us for free, respect, dignity, and the right to exist without being judged based on baseless assumptions. The crowd listened in silence, her words piercing the reality of injustice. And we will not stop until real change happens. She clenched her fists, her eyes burning with determination. Amelia's story quickly spread through the media. Newspapers, television, and social media were all abuzz. Angry voices called for accountability, demanding that the jewelry store be held accountable for its discriminatory behavior. The pressure grew by the day. The chain's corporate office could no longer hide. Eventually, they were forced to issue a public apology, announce an internal investigation, and institute mandatory diversity and inclusion training. But that was not enough. Claire Benson, the manager who turned a blind eye to the injustice, was permanently removed from her position. Amelia, however, was not satisfied. She knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. She and Marcus quietly prepared a legal case against the store, determined to bring the truth to light. They worked tirelessly with a team of lawyers, collecting every piece of evidence, internal documents, employee and customer testimonies, security footage, all pieces of the puzzle that would paint a true picture of discrimination. Long weeks passed, then months of painstaking preparation. But Amelia was undaunted. She spent hours in meetings, discussing strategy, preparing her testimony. Derek was always by her side, his eyes full of support, a solid anchor in the storm. The day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was packed, the tension suffocating. As Amelia stepped up to the witness stand, her heart pounded, but she knew she couldn't back down. Taking a deep breath, she began to tell the truth, every detail, every emotion, every grievance. Her words struck every person in the room, making it impossible for them to turn away. When she finished, silence fell over the courtroom. No one dared to say a word. Then, one by one, other victims took the stand. They told their own stories, pieces of tragedy that stacked up together, painting an undeniable picture of the store's misconduct. The defense tried to argue that these were isolated incidents, the fault of individual employees. But Amelia knew, and now the world knew, too, this was not an isolated incident. This was an unjust system, and she would fight to the death to break it. The trial ended, and the jury returned a final verdict: the jewelry store was guilty of racial discrimination. Not only was they ordered to pay a substantial amount of restitution to the victims, they were also required to make sweeping changes to their policies, ensuring that no one else would ever suffer the same injustice that Amelia had. As Amelia walked out of the courthouse, a gentle breeze blew past her, as if carrying away all the burdens that had been weighing on her shoulders all this time. She took a deep breath, letting the relief spread through her body. This was not just her victory, but also the victory of all those who had been treated unfairly, who had never had a chance to speak up. Justice had been served, but more importantly, real change had begun. In the weeks that followed, Amelia often reflected on everything that had happened. She had begun this journey in pain and anger, humiliated and wrongly accused. But now, she was stronger, more determined, and more purposeful than ever. She was fighting not just for herself, but for those who had no chance to be heard. One evening, as the sun was slowly setting over the horizon, Amelia and Derek sat together in the living room, the sunset casting a soft orange glow over the space. Amelia turned to him, her voice quiet but thoughtful. "Do you think we really made a difference?" Derek looked at her, a warm smile on his lips. He wrapped his arms around her, his voice steady and sincere. "Yes, Amelia. We did it. You did it. You stood up not just for yourself, but for so many others. You showed them that no one needs to be afraid to stand up for what is right." Amelia nodded, resting her head on his chest. She closed her eyes, feeling Derek's steady heartbeat, a reminder that she was not alone. "I just hope people don't forget how this happened." "They won't." Derek squeezed her shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "You've sparked something, Amelia. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it is happening. And it's people like you, people who stand up and say, 'Enough,' who make the real difference." Sitting together, they didn't need to say anything more. Amelia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that the fight wasn't over, there was so much more to do, so many people to protect. But at least she had shown that injustice could be defeated, that the world could be made fairer, little by little. And that was a victory worth celebrating. Life was slowly returning to normal, but not the same. Amelia and Derek saw the world with a new awareness, a greater sense of responsibility. No longer bystanders, they know that their voices matter, that their actions can make a difference. Day after day, Amelia receives countless thanks from strangers. On the street, at events, even via online messages, people reach out to her to share their stories, to thank her for daring to do what many only think is possible. Some recount the injustices they have endured, while others simply express admiration for her courage. But most importantly, Amelia realizes that she has inspired something bigger than herself. She has planted a seed, and it is growing. Amelia realized that what began as a fight for her dignity had grown into something more, a call to change an ingrained system of power and prejudice. That afternoon, sitting at her desk, sifting through emails, Amelia paused when a message caught her eye. The subject line was simple but powerful: "I don't know what to do anymore." The message was from a young woman named Kendra. She described her experiences of discrimination at her workplace, a high-end retail store in Manhattan. Despite her qualifications and experience, Kendra was repeatedly passed over for promotions. When she questioned these decisions, she received only circumlocutions, with comments implying that customers tend to be served by people who look better. "I felt trapped," Kendra wrote. "I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I was afraid to speak up. If I did, I could lose my job, which I needed to support my family. But I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay." As Amelia read these words, a familiar fire burned inside her. The helplessness, the fear, the feeling of being cornered, all of these things she had experienced before. But Amelia also knew one thing: silence was never the answer. She decided to meet Kendra. They met at a small coffee shop near where Kendra worked. When Kendra walked in, Amelia could see the exhaustion in the young woman's eyes. An invisible burden weighed down on her thin shoulders. They sat down, ordered coffee, and Kendra began to talk. She talked about the subtle discrimination, the rejections, the blatant bias she witnessed every day. When she mentioned other employees who had dared to speak up and been forced to leave, her voice trembled. "I was afraid. I didn't know what to do. If I fought, they would find a way to get rid of me." Amelia listened, Kendra's words cutting into her heart. She knew this fear. She had faced it before. But she also knew a more important truth: fear could not be a chain forever. "You are not alone," Amelia said, her voice soft but firm. "I know you feel that way, but you are not. And more importantly, you do not have to fight alone." Kendra looked at Amelia, her eyes shining with a faint hope, as if she were looking for a promise that the road ahead would not be so scary. "But what can I do? I can't lose my job." Amelia took a deep breath. "We will find a way. And this time, they will not be able to silence you. You don't have to go through this alone." Amelia emphasized again, her voice low but powerful. "We can draw attention to what's happening. We can make sure they know you have support, and if they try to retaliate, we'll make sure the public knows exactly what they're doing." Kendra fell silent, her eyes wavering between worry and hope. She felt her heart pounding not just with fear but with something else, a realization. Amelia had planted a belief in her, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. After a moment, Kendra took a deep breath, as if gathering all the courage she had left. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I'll do this. I will speak up." It wasn't an easy decision. Amelia knew it. She knew that once Kendra took this step, there was no turning back. But silence was no longer an option. Too many people had suffered in silence for too long. It was time for change. Immediately, Amelia reached out to her legal network, connecting Kendra with an employment discrimination attorney. They worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, documenting every offensive comment, every denied opportunity, every time Kendra's voice was ignored. With each detail documented, the case against the retailer grew stronger. But Amelia didn't stop there. She continued her advocacy, more determined than ever. She wasn't just fighting for Kendra, she was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. Her voice grew louder, inspiring others to stand up as well. As Kendra's case was, the story exploded. The media quickly jumped on board, with major news outlets reporting on the story. People compared Kendra's experience to Amelia's previous fight against the jewelry store, and outrage was widespread. Public pressure mounted on the company to respond. But instead of admitting their mistakes and making amends, the store's management tried to cover things up, just as they had done in the past. Only this time, the world was watching. Lies and cover-ups could no longer hide the truth. As Kendra's legal team continued to investigate, more and more employees bravely came forward to tell their stories. What was happening was more than an isolated incident, it was a system of discrimination that was deeply embedded in the company culture. One where people of color were marginalized, where their contributions were ignored, where opportunities were systematically limited. Eventually, the case went to court. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The stands were packed with reporters, while outside, protesters held signs and chanted for justice for Kendra and for all those who had been wronged. The fight was not over. But this time, Kendra was not fighting alone. Amelia sat in the courtroom, her eyes never leaving Kendra as she took the stand. She had come a long way from her initial fear and hesitation. Now, with so many eyes on her, Kendra was no longer the timid woman who had been afraid to speak up. She stood tall, her eyes blazing with determination. "I worked hard," Kendra said, her voice steady, though her hands shook slightly as she held the microphone. "I earned the right to be considered for those promotions, just like everyone else. But I was never given a fair chance. That's not right. The defense tried to paint Kendra as a disgruntled person looking for an excuse to blame the company. But each piece of evidence presented, testimonials from other employees, internal emails, clear patterns of bias, all added up to an undeniable picture, a system that intentionally held people like her back. Each word Kendra spoke was a sharp knife cutting through the company's rhetoric. She wasn't just telling her story, she was fighting not just for herself, but for others who had suffered the same injustices she had. The jury listened, and their eyes slowly opened to sympathy, then anger at what had happened. Finally, the verdict came. The company was found guilty of discrimination. They were ordered to pay a substantial settlement and make sweeping changes to their hiring and promotion policies. Furthermore, they were required to provide mandatory diversity training to all employees. The courtroom erupted in a murmur as the verdict was announced. Kendra let out a sigh, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She turned to Amelia, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't think I could have done this without you." Amelia smiled, pulling Kendra into a warm hug. "You did it," she whispered. "I just helped you see that you could." The case made headlines for weeks. It sparked a national conversation about workplace discrimination and the importance of creating fair systems. Companies across the country began to reconsider their policies, fearful that they might be the next target of a public scandal. But above all, this victory was not just for Kendra. It was a symbol for everyone who had been trampled on, who thought they had no voice. And now, they knew they were no longer alone. The war wasn't over yet, but Amelia knew they'd made progress. They'd stood up, they'd won, and with each victory, the path forward became a little clearer. Back home, Amelia and Derek sat together on a quiet evening. Outside the window, the city continued to move with distant sounds, but in their small apartment, there was only silence and a sense of mutual safety. Derek glanced at Amelia, his eyes filled with admiration. His voice was deep, filled with sincerity and pride. "I always knew you were strong, Amelia. But after what you've done these past few months, I've never been so proud of you." Amelia smiled, feeling the warmth radiating from his words. She rested her head on Derek's shoulder, closing her eyes for a brief moment of peace. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. They sat in silence, as if sharing the weight of all they had been through. The weight was slowly fading, like layers of fog lifting in the morning light. But even as they enjoyed this rare moment of silence, Amelia's mind raced to the future. She knew this was just the beginning. There was so much more to do. After a moment, she spoke softly, her voice carrying an unwavering determination. "I've been thinking about starting an organization. Something bigger than ourselves. A place to help people like Kendra, people who don't have the resources, don't have the voice to fight injustice on their own." Derek was silent for a moment, then he smiled. A confident smile. He leaned in and kissed the top of her head, his breath fanning over her hair, a silent promise. "I think it's a great idea," he said. "And I don't think anyone else can do it but you." Amelia's heart pounded. She felt excited but also filled with responsibility. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but nothing worth fighting for came easy. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that one person could make a difference. And now she was ready to take that difference even further. In the weeks since Kendra's case closed, Amelia couldn't stop thinking about her plan. The idea of an organization that would not only help the vulnerable but also challenge systemic injustice in multiple industries grew within her. She had seen firsthand the power of giving people a platform to speak up, but she also knew that many people were still silent, out of fear, uncertainty, or simply because they didn't know where to start. Amelia spent days mapping out her vision, writing and rewriting hundreds of ideas in a notebook. She wanted to create a place where anyone facing discrimination could find support, not just legally, but mentally and emotionally. Most importantly, she wanted to help them find the courage to fight back. This was not just a law firm. This was a movement. One evening, as Amelia was poring over her notebook, she felt Derek's gaze across the room. She looked up, and his eyes were filled with faith not just in her, but in the future they were working toward together. "You know what?" he chuckled. "We're not done fighting. But I think, we're just getting started." Amelia smiled, feeling her heart burn with determination. She knew a new journey lay ahead, and she was ready to take it. "You're busy, aren't you?" he said with a quick smile, his eyes drifting to the papers spread out on the dining table. I looked up at Derek, eyes bright with excitement. "I think I'm ready to start building this." But then I took a deep breath, my voice quiet. "It's just. I'm going to need some help." Derek stood up, walked over to the table, and scanned my notes. It didn't take him long to understand what I was trying to do. He nodded, without hesitation. "You're going to get there," he said, his voice low but firm. "There are people out there who want to see change just as much as you do. All you have to do is ask." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Derek's support was more than just words of encouragement, it was a reminder that I wasn't alone. I nodded, feeling grateful. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of calls, meetings, and connections. I reached out to people in my network of lawyers, activists, community leaders, even people who had stood with me in the battle with the jewelry store. I didn't know what to expect, but the response was overwhelming. Word spread like wildfire. Soon my phone was ringing off the hook with offers of support. People were eager to get involved in something that could bring about real change. Meetings began to take place, in small conference rooms, in friends' living rooms, in bustling coffee shops. We discussed strategy, resources, and goals. I wanted this organization to be more than just a nonprofit. It had to be a force for good, a movement for accountability and justice. A place not just to seek justice for individuals but also to challenge unjust systems. We called it Justice Collective. The launch of Justice Collective came sooner than expected. With a small but enthusiastic team, we held a public event to announce the organization. A local community center became the meeting place. The doors were open to anyone who wanted to learn about our mission. That evening, the auditorium was packed. People came from all over, all ages, races, and backgrounds. There were reporters from local news stations, lawyers willing to share their expertise, activists looking to mobilize their communities. Some came out of curiosity, others because they had experienced injustice themselves. But they all had one thing in common: they wanted to be part of the change. As I stepped onto the stage, my heart pounded in my chest. I looked out at the crowd before me and felt a surge of emotion. I was no longer alone. The Justice Collective is not just my dream anymore, it is the hope of all of you standing here. Taking a deep breath, I begin to speak. Tonight is not just the beginning of an organization. Tonight, we begin a journey, to bring about justice, to change the unchangeable. And we will do it, together. Amelia began her speech, her voice strong but filled with emotion. The Justice Collective was born out of a personal struggle, a fight for dignity and respect. But today, it has become something much bigger. She paused, her eyes scanning the room filled with determined people. We are here because we believe that no one should have to fight for justice alone. We are here because we know that change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens, when we stand together. The applause was thunderous, a wave of energy filling the room. Amelia clasped her hands on the podium, feeling the strong connection between her and those around her. And this is just the beginning. Her voice became firmer. The road ahead is long and challenging, but with every case we take on, every voice we amplify, every system we hold accountable, we get closer to the world we believe in. A world where no one is judged by the color of their skin, their gender, their circumstances, or their beliefs. A world where justice is not just a distant concept, but a tangible reality for everyone. By the end of the event, the Justice Collective had attracted dozens of supporters, volunteers, and a significant amount of donations. It was clear that the organization had tapped into the hunger for change in many people, people who were tired of waiting for someone else to act for them. They wanted to be a part of this change. In the months that followed, the Justice Collective grew rapidly. Amelia and her team took on cases ranging from employment discrimination, to housing injustice, to law enforcement misconduct. Each victory they won, each policy they helped change, not only strengthened their organization, but also made their resolve stronger. But the work was not easy. With every step forward, there were moments of frustration and seemingly endless battles. Some lawsuits dragged on for years due to bureaucratic hurdles and fierce resistance from large corporations. At times, Amelia wondered if they were really making a difference, or if they were just locked in an endless battle with a system that refused to change. One of their biggest challenges was a lawsuit against a national retailer accused of widespread discrimination. The corporation not only had a formidable legal team, but it was also not afraid to use any means to drag out the case, discredit the plaintiff, and put pressure on the Justice Collective. Every night, after long days of arguing in court, Amelia would come home exhausted, her eyes heavy with fatigue. Derek was waiting for her. He knew something was wrong with just one look at her face. "I don't know if I can keep going." Amelia let out a soft sigh as she collapsed into a chair. "This case is too big, they're too strong. It feels like no matter what we do, they're always one step ahead." Derek sat down next to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But you've come this far, Amelia. You've overcome challenges that others would have given up on long ago. Don't forget what you've achieved. Change takes time, but you're fighting for what's right, and that's what matters most." Amelia leaned her head back against the chair, her eyes half closed. "I just don't want to let anyone down. There are so many people counting on us." Derek squeezed her hand gently. "You won't let anyone down. But you're not fighting alone. You've built something great, and you have a team that believes in it, just as I do. And most of all, you need to believe in yourself." Derek's words, simple yet heartfelt, lit a small spark in Amelia's heart. She took a deep breath. He was right. She couldn't let the immediate challenges overshadow the bigger picture, couldn't let one battle overshadow the fight for justice. A few months later, after countless hearings, tense legal arguments, and moments of seeming defeat, the case finally reached a turning point. The court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, finding that the company had indeed broken the law and engaged in systemic discrimination. This victory is not only a huge step forward for the immediate victims of this case, but it also sends a powerful message across the country: no corporation, no matter how powerful, can escape justice. And for Amelia, this is more than just a victory. It is proof that their efforts were not in vain. The fight continues, but today, they took another step forward, and she knows, there will be many more until true justice is served for everyone.